I'm going to play the clip first, and then I'm going to have you explain how you got here, how you got there, and what was going on. Here's Delano. I saw this on Delano's social media yesterday, and it caught my attention. Here's Delano on C-SPAN. Let's play the clip.
My last question to him, since he's a member of the Heritage, he's also, I guess, a promoter of the Project 2025. And I would ask him, are you a DEI hire for Heritage, since that seems to be
all right, Anwar.
Let me answer the second question first, right? In terms of being a DEI hire, there's no part of me that believes that. I have the respect of my colleagues. My work stands for itself. As I said, I've been writing about these issues and thinking about these issues since I was 15, but even in official capacity for over a decade. But it's interesting that some of the same people who say that black folks need DEI and celebrate DEI will use DEI as a way to insult black people with whom they disagree. I find that actually odd, quite interesting.
So what was the invitation? Why were you on C-SPAN? What were you talking about? And how did it lead to that question?
Sure. So Jason, I recently wrote a report called Moving Beyond Moynihan, which talks about the Moynihan report, obviously, which was written 60 years ago. But the subtitle is A New Plan to Revive Marriage and Rebuild the Black Family. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about for the last 4 years on the show that I research in my day job at the Heritage Foundation, I put down on paper. So I received, C-SPAN reached out to the Heritage comms team and say, hey, would Delano be willing to come on the show, the Washington Journal, and talk about his report? So that's what I did. So I came on. The host was very gracious. She asked some really good questions. It's clear that she had read the report. So that was the reason I was there. And we talked about the report, and then at a certain period of time, they go to live Q&A. And at that point, they open up the lines and people will call with their questions and or comments. And this was, one of the questions that was asked. And actually, this came at the tail end. The person you heard was actually asking a question more so about government aid, and didn't the Biden administration do many things to lift families out of poverty, and they cut childhood poverty. So he was really making a point about the importance of government aid to support low-income families. And then at the end, he stuck in that part about Heritage Project 2025 and asking if I was a DEI hire.
So it caught my attention because I think last week I was talking about DEI and why I believe it needs to end. And people have been, because Charlie Kirk was so anti-DEI, people see this as a line in the sand and a racial issue. And there seems to be a belief among some black people that we can't survive or excel without DEI or affirmative action. I completely reject that. And so what do you say to the people? Because I think the man's question was coming from like, don't you understand you're a DEI hire and you wouldn't have a job without DEI? I reject that. It's a myth. It's something that's been used to mentally demoralize us, that without someone doing you a favor, you couldn't even exist here in America. Anyway, your reaction.
Yeah, and I think he was trying to take a swipe, right? Now, he phrased it as a question, but I think obviously he was trying to take a swipe. It didn't bother me. I mean, that sort of stuff don't bother me at all. But I to your point, those three letters put together, DEI, which, Jason, is a fairly recent phenomenon. You can't go to any major publication in the year 2010 and find any article with the capital letters D, E, and I put together in that way. So this is a fairly recent phenomenon. I think the left has been very effective at painting the picture or making the case to particularly to black folks that is the only way that we can get into college, that we can get jobs, that we can excel. And it is one of those things that I find very offensive. but I'm more disappointed that so many people have accepted that lie, that if there aren't DEI initiatives, then I can't get a job at this particular place. And I think what conservatives tend to say is that no, to the extent that DEI means lowering standards in perpetuity for different groups of people, or for prioritizing, immutable characteristics, a person's skin color or their sex, as it relates to hiring and or even sometimes firing, that is not something that is acceptable, legal, or desirable in such a large country, that we have. I will say this though, and I think you've seen this as well. Much of this comes from the left, obviously, where they want to discredit a Black person with whom they disagree, as I said. But every once in a while, there's some voices on the right who will say the same thing to black conservatives at times, and to say, oh, you only have that position in the conservative ecosystem because conservatives are looking for Black voices to say things that white conservatives are looking for Black voices to say things that they want to say but can't say, and that's why they go and get somebody, like you. And I reject that premise, obviously, on both sides of the aisle, because ultimately, as I said, a man's work is going to have to stand on its own, and that's the way I think people should be judged.
I hope I can unpack this in real time because I wasn't prepared for this, but I think that my career, I think that your career proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that people that hire you are in the pursuit of excellence and in the pursuit of, hey, how can I make my company agenda, narrative, project excellent, the best that it can be. And that's why you get the opportunity. But I do think there is the way the world has been constructed, the way social media has been constructed, that there was a reality of like, hey man, if someone's going to promote biblical values, the way this system's rigged, as a white man, if I promote biblical values, it's immediately going to be dismissed as racist. Whereas if a Black person promotes biblical values, you can't just dismiss it as racism instantly. You can call him an Uncle Tom, you can call him a coon, you can call him the black face of white supremacy, but you just can't call it racist. And so I don't even see it as bad strategy the way the thing was rigged. Now, again, I've moved into this space and been very strong about like, nah, man, you white dudes need to stand out here 10 toes down and stand on your beliefs and values and quit apologizing for it, blah, blah, blah. But it's no different than, and I'm going to try to land this plane with a question. It's like I argued, Vodi Bakum was the biblical foundation for being against DEI. That he gave, as a Christian minister, he would give you the biblical explanation of why you could be against DEI. And the fact that he was Black making that argument made it even more effective. And that's why I'm, for me, who had these instincts, but when Vodi stood there as a minister behind a pulpit and basically argued all the same things and wrote the book Fault Lines and other books that backed up my instincts and gave me like, man, I know I'm in good standing with God as I make this stand because Vodi's giving me that. I think all that's important. And so I don't even know if I have a great question. I'm just kind of rambling, but your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this present moment, right, a lot of these things get blended. This is like almost like an Arnold Palmer, right? So there's a mix of iced tea, there's a mix of lemonade. Sometimes you can't decipher what you're tasting at a particular moment. And when I say that, I'm talking about the biblical worldview things, as well as the political things. And so when I say that there's a mix, it's like I will hear let me give an example, right? Because you mentioned Vodi, and obviously it's somebody who I learned a tremendous amount from. There are conservatives who were cheering Vodi when he was smacking down a lot of the social justice stuff in 2020, smacking down racial collectivism, smacking down unbiblical categories when it comes to race, smacking down the notion that you blend sin and skin together in such a way where you generalize and demonize an entire group of people who are doing the exact same thing today, only in a different direction on the right? And you may see some of these people. I see my algorithm is set up in such a way where I see them engaging in some of the same behaviors. Now, we white people are the victims, right? There are black sins. So when I'm not talking about an individual person, I'm talking about the sins of black culture, which I can use from my state that has, I don't know, 2-3% of black folks. I am generalizing, and some would say demonizing, but I'll just say generalizing an entire group of people. Certainly, I'm collectivizing, right? I'm talking in terms of tribal collectives, and I see that. And to me, one of the characteristics of a biblical worldview that is most lacking in today's sort of political ecosystem is the desire for equal weights and measures, is a balanced scale. So I'm not talking about specific talking points. I'm saying whatever is the standard that I use when I'm talking about my tribe, that's the standard that I use when I'm talking about somebody else's tribe, knowing full well that people when I'm talking to outsiders, they tend to be far more defensive than when I'm talking to insiders. That's human nature across the board. If you want to get Catholics defensive, let their criticism come from a Protestant. If you want to get Americans defensive, let the criticism come from the CCP. If you want to get black folks defensive, let the criticism come from white people. And if you want to get white people defensive, let the criticism come from black folks. This is human nature, but what I see, and this goes back to even the questions about DEI, is that sometimes people say, well, I'm going to engage in this type of behavior, right? But I'm not going to, I'm going to call it out in other people even while I practice it myself. So yes, I'm all for bringing a biblical worldview to cultural issues. But more than anything, I think we need just weights and equal measures. And that's the part that I don't think is as evident today.